artificial intelligence. It's a buzzword I hear all the time, and every vendor and their mother wants to put it on their product. Let's talk to an actual expert. Peter Scott, author of a new book on artificial intelligence, joins us for this bonus episode of The Business of Tech. Well, Peter, thanks for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be on the show, Dave.
So I've been really curious to dive in on this topic because it feels like we're constantly having a discussion around artificial intelligence. And I look around and I don't think most people actually know what that means. I think they're throwing the term around too much as a marketing buzzword, and then they mix it with other terms. Can you start by defining what is artificial intelligence the way that you're approaching it?
Well, you're right. It is being thrown around a lot. There is a lot of conversation. In fact, there's so much conversation. There's a meta conversation. There are people whose study is the conversation about AI. They're generally anthropologists and philosophers. So artificial intelligence is one of those terms that it just grabs you and says, I must be something special because of that word intelligence. If they had called it electronic cognition, or enhanced computation, we wouldn't be having this discussion like this. We'd be doing the same things, but it wouldn't have that emotional freight attached to it that says, I'm doing something that is the exclusive province of human beings. And that's where all the heat comes from about this. So you can define it multiple ways, and people have, and you can define it in the strict technical sense of encompassing machine learning and deep learning and various algorithms that improve their ability to predict things based on how much data you give them. I like to say that artificial intelligence is doing something that a human being can do, perhaps slower, perhaps many times slower, but they can't describe precisely the steps for doing that. And that's a useful term for a useful definition for the ways in which artificial intelligence is making the most impact now.
Okay, you mentioned it, and because oftentimes artificial intelligence is linked to machine learning. Help me clarify the understanding, the difference between what machine learning is as potentially a subset of AI. Help clarify that for me.
Right. Machine learning is algorithms that improve their ability to predict things as a result of an increased amount of training. Artificial intelligence encompasses that and other things, other computation that looks like it's doing something like a human being is, but all the focus today is on machine learning, in particular on the subset of machine learning called deep learning. Everything that's grabbing the headlines about AI at the moment is some species of deep learning. Okay,
all right, that helps me understand a little bit. So I want to start with a simple premise, and I want you to tell me if I'm right or wrong on this one. I've been looking at this space, particularly from that IT services company, managed services provider, and putting on my SMB hat, because that tends to be most of the companies out there and most of the market. My thinking has been that for the SMB market and the technology companies that serve them, AI will be a feature embedded in a product, not something they build. And so it's something they want to understand. They want to understand the implications to it, but it's not something you necessarily build themselves or necessarily even have control over. What's your take on that premise?
Obviously, we're talking about a vast universe of possible applications and sectors here. So in general, I would agree with you that for the smaller players to be able to digest AI, it's got to be prepackaged for them so it goes down easily. It's got to be given to them so that the number of dials and knobs is minimized and that it's essentially this black box. Now, there'll be leakage around the edges of that. There'll be people that can see opportunities. In fact, one thing I would say right now is an opportunity for anyone in the biomedical space is what DeepMind has done with AlphaFold in decoding the structure of every protein that we know of. And that meant that space went from 190,000 protein structures to 200 million overnight, which were donated for free. Prior to that, getting a protein structure took a PhD thesis, usually, years and millions of dollars. Now, there's no way that you can increase the size of a knowledge space by a factor of 1,000 and not create an entirely new industry around that, industries. So people who are close to that may sense some sort of gold rush opportunity there and not wait for it to be packaged, but get in there and be part of the packaging.
So it would seem then that the industries that are ripe to take advantage of it pre-packaging, so to speak, would be those ones with really large, complex data sets. Are there other criteria, or is that one even right for thinking about those fields and areas and industries that are ripe for it to be applied kind of pre-packaging?
That's right. The new gold, the new oil is data. The more of it you have that belongs to you, the more you can do with AI. Sometimes not even very sophisticated AI. You can plug something into Amazon SageMaker or another tool and get results out right away. You've got to understand your data, but no one else can do that for you. It's your data.
Okay, got it. Now, you've got a new book coming out, which is one of the reasons that we talked about. And the book is Artificial Intelligence and You, What AI Means for Your Life, Your Work, and Your World. I really appreciated it because it actually broke it down into those categories. And one of the things that I wanted to sort of dive into a section that I was interested in, because you've got a layout particularly for companies, and you break them down into product and services and the way they approach the market, and you break it into quadrants. And I immediately, my brain went into that and said, okay, now I can place my space and my field in this. And you've got those traditional services-oriented companies. You call it directly out. Your example is insurance brokering. That immediately translated to me for the services companies, as well as anybody thinking cybersecurity. It fits kind of the whole space. Your general take here seemed to be that it was all about thinking about process, reassessing org structures, being able to look at fulfillment, human resources. Is this change and the application of artificial intelligence, is this all about process management and the impacts to process, or am I off base?
Well, I think that's part of it. In the example of insurance, as you gave, there's examples right now of some companies that are automating the claims adjustments process. They found that AI could do the job of taking pictures of a car that's been dinged up and do the claim for you. So the person that was doing that before, that would come out and look at the car, take their own pictures, have a dialogue with you, fill out forms, that part is gone. There is no waiting any longer. The customer can get the settlement while they're on the phone and while they're doing that. That's transformative. Now, does that mean that person, that claims adjuster, is out of a job? Well, they are good at human contact. They are used to dealing with people who are in a very messy space, stressed out, and so they've got those skills for handling people and communicating. Now, the fact that the rote part, the form filling out part of the job has been taken by an AI doesn't mean that the rest of what they do isn't so useful. But you've got to reassess, where do you fit that into this business or another one? And so it really calls for a reinvention at that stage. If you're going to compete with one of those companies that's automating this field by doing the same thing, then you should be looking at your org structure and saying, well, where else can we and should we be doing this? How much of our organizational structure is predicated on this idea that we have people out in the field that we no longer need to be out in the field doing what they've been doing? Okay,
so it's implied in that answer is that your view of it is a lot of augmentation of people versus replacement. Is that a fair take?
No, absolutely. There's a lot of the game of thriving through artificial intelligence right now is about mindset, because we're beset by tropes that dominate the conversation. One of them is a Terminator. You start talking about certain things in AI, they will run a picture of the Terminator next to you, guaranteed. and then conversation stops about anything else. And another one is the question about jobs, because people always go to the idea that they're going to lose their job. And it's not that isn't a possible scenario. It's also not true that there isn't a Terminator scenario out there, but we overweight those unduly, and that blinds us to what we should be doing, which is leveraging it, as you say, augmentation. It's the other. It's you flip the letters around, you have IA, and that's intelligence augmentation. Now, as long as you look at your role and what you're good at, and emphasize the skills and the talents, like what we're doing, having a conversation at a level that AI can't approach right now, then your replacement is not what you should be looking at. You should be looking at, how do I augment what I'm doing with AI to automate the parts that, frankly, I'm getting bored with.
Well, the tropes are fun because they're good stories, but it's my impression, actually, that that's actually doing a disservice to AI, because most of the tropes are far more sophisticated than the actual AI out there. My bad version of the trope would be HAL 9000, right? Where it's the smart computer that's running a ship. But that's not what we're actually deploying right now in the field, right? I mean, what's the gap there between the vision of the trope and what's actually being put in the field?
Sure. Well, the tropes, the media, Hollywood, it gravitates towards things that make good stories and which can be shot easily. So robots, right? Especially humanoid ones, because then you can put an actor inside a suit and do it. Hal was going out on a limb that you wouldn't reach these days as a director, because I had no body. I had a very boring voice, but it was still demonstrating this threat of the AI taking over and destroying you.
What's the gap between the trope and reality? What are the most advanced ones that we're deploying right now? It feels like there's a big gap between that vision of a good story and what's actually happening in the real world.
Sure. And actually, one of the things that's instructive to look at that gap is, if you look at HAL 9000, he beat one of the astronauts at chess in the movie, and that was put in as an example of, this is how smart this computer is. It can win chess. It can beat humans at chess. That's hard, right? Well, 1997 came around, which was when HAL was actually supposed to have been built, according to the movie. And we had a computer beating humans at chess, but it couldn't do the conversational part. So the movement in AI is on areas that we would consider uneven. We would think of as, this is some kind of Big Bang Theory kind of nerd here that is very good at narrow things, but is like this robot. It doesn't understand conversation. The tropes want to go to something that's a conversationalist, because otherwise it's boring. And that's the huge distraction, because meanwhile, AI is doing things like composing music effortlessly to form, to requirement, making new drawings and art to requirement effortlessly. And if you were going to talk about someone being replaced, I would be worried if I was a composer of incidental music for movies, because now you can have an AI where you can say, hit this emotional beat at this point, this one 12 and a half seconds later, and have it do it and have it be listenable. Same thing with people creating artwork, incidental artwork for instance, magazines, where there's no question of is this someone suffering for their art? Do I need to know the story of how they have transcended the human realms to bring down inspiration from the heavens? No. But yet that's where we get distracted by thinking about, well, are artists going to be replaced? Is Michelangelo and Da Vinci, are they out of a job? That's looking in the wrong place.
So it'd be much more the commercial wage artist who's doing stock photography and basic graphic design for a website, much more than the masterpieces of that we talk about from an artistic perspective? Is that where the disruption is much more likely to happen?
Exactly. That's what we're seeing right now. You can give one of these engines a prompt to say, give me a photorealistic picture of a corgi inside a doghouse made of sushi, and it does it flawlessly.
Okay, got it. So one of the themes that you talk about in the book is some of the questions of kind of ethics and thinking and process that business leaders need to be thinking about. Where does somebody start with that? When do you have to be, because it would feel like you'd want to make decisions about the ethics and implementation before you go forth and do anything in this space. Is that right? And where would somebody start?
I think that it's inevitable that you'll be going ahead doing things as you're working the ethics out. Just about everyone who's not constrained by some sort of oversight or reporting requirements like HIPAA is going to be doing that anyway. And the ethical space had been very Wild West and still is to some extent, but there's a lot more cowboys in it now. There's a lot more people entering that field, and so there's a lot more help with the ethics. There are companies devoted to helping people with the ethics of AI implementations. And so again, you don't have to work all of that out on your own. There are consultants for helping you navigate that space. Mostly the ethical challenges of using AI are what you had with using your data. It's just that AI can help you make the same mistakes faster and at scale.
Well, it feels like, though, that we haven't necessarily worked out even the questions of data, and now we're able to weaponize them faster. That's why I'm kind of pushing and saying, like, well, how it feels like the old adage of measure twice, cut once does feel like it has some relevance here, because if we already were doing things with data and not necessarily thinking them through, and now we can do it even faster. Well, that can lead us to some really bad places pretty fast. And if you're in lots of spaces that seem innocuous, right? Well, but healthcare is a really big space, and there's tons of IT there. There is anything having to do with anything on the legal front, and we've got tons in that space as well. All the professional services stuff. So I'm going to ask a little bit, like, well, yeah, I get that practically you're going to be diving in and trying things, but what are some of those good starting questions that you want to be asking yourself as a business leader as you do so?
One of them might be, what's the worst that could happen? And planning accordingly, and obviously getting help from people that have been down this road before or trodden some of the ethical paths. And the risks range from zero for, say, recommender algorithms. You know, if Netflix says, you're really going to love this movie, and you go, like, no, that doesn't turn me on at all, you're not going to sue. It doesn't mean anything. But as you say, in the healthcare space, in the legal space, in insurance, everything where there's money or life at stake, then you've probably got already some sort of regulatory oversight that you have to comply with, and ethical standards, professional standards that you've got to meet too. And since AI comes down to data, the question to answer first is, what do you want to do with your data, and what are the possible problems with it? I mean, I know it sounds vague, but we're talking about enormous space, right? If you're going to do customer relationship management, you've got a huge customer database, you're going to mine that for all kinds of things, then privacy is top of your list, and probably perhaps surmounted by consequences of bias. Because if you start doing something like, well, when Amazon was hiring people, and they, as they always are, but they put an AI on their resume scanner, and it decided to reject women because most of the people that they had hired up until that date from applications were men. And so it's saying, well, okay, you trained me to do what you've been doing up until now, so I'm going to keep doing that. You have to be aware of, is my data accurate? Is it representative? If I'm giving it the AI a sample, And does it meet my aspirations, or are there things in there that I actually want to change? Because then it gets difficult.
Well, let me give you a space then that we can talk a little bit more concrete about, because the one that we spend a lot of time on as listeners is cybersecurity, right? So these are the traditional space of trying to protect data from hackers, from being stolen for ransomware, and every one of the vendors that I seem to see in this space is now throwing AI, ML as a feature of their product, right? And they'll say, now this is our protection is enhanced with artificial intelligence. It's enhanced with machine learning. And if you're a consumer of that, if you're a buyer of these technologies, or you're the technology services firm that's advising, it's difficult to look and say, I don't know how to evaluate that when it's just a marketing term thrown at that. How would you, as somebody who's in this space, what are some of the questions or insights that we're looking for from these software vendors to give us insight into how sophisticated or real that really is?
Well, there's a lot of AI washing going on right now. I mean, 3 vendors of washing machines claim that their machine has AI in it, and it's not going to start fermenting a revolution in your laundry. It's doing something that barely qualifies as AI. And so anyone that can put the label AI on something plausibly does so. I would look to see, well, never mind the label, what do you claim that this is going to do? And proceed from there. There's certainly room for a lot of AI in the cybersecurity space, because if you have got a business large enough to be looking at a lot of data about who's trying to hack you, for instance, what's going on your networks, then you could look for patterns. You can see things like who's supposed to be logged on and alert when they are logged on at the wrong time, or is there a pattern of denial of service that you can thwart? It's basically going just one step beyond the statistical analysis of, I've gone over a threshold. All right, this value here has exceeded 3 standard deviations above the mean. I'm going to trigger an alert. No one would call that AI. Well, you can go just a little bit further mathematically and now start calling it AI. Basically, if no one understands what you're doing, then you can get away with it. So you want to just be looking at, well, what do they claim the results of this are? And I wouldn't pay that much attention to whether they call it AI.
So the answer then, if I'm sort of reflecting it back, is that they need to be able to back up any claims of performance enhancements with some kind of research data. They should be able to say it outperforms, or it delivers this service at X level, or whatever that is, to be able to justify the investment. Is that sort of sounding like the right way to look at it?
In this case, I would say take whatever they're sending you, take a big fat marker and redact the words artificial intelligence and AI wherever they occur, or replace them with mathematics. And then look at it and see how you react to it then. Okay,
well, that's good generally marketing advice. So if somebody was interested in sort of a starting point for their thinking of applications, and they're listening to this going, okay, I get it. I want to start exploring applying AI to it. The obvious place is your book, but what's a great resource to sort of get them started?
You likely want something that's already specialized to that vertical. So, that could be dentistry bookstores, pet stores, who knows what. And if they've got a vertical application in there already, I would be looking at that, because anytime someone has already customized AI in that field, I would think, unless you've got someone with a PhD in mathematics and computational science sitting next to you, then you're going to save time by going there. In casting such a broad net, that would be the advice I'd give at that point, because to try and craft it from scratch, it's the sort of thing I enjoy doing, but most of your SMBs are saying this is not what I get paid for.
Well, that's why we have experts like you. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for your time and attention. Time is a finite resource, and I really value you giving me some of yours. If you like this video, you can let me know with a like of the video, and even more valuable, hitting the subscription button. My content is all free, and I use metrics like subscriptions to pay the bills, so it has real value. The content here is produced under ethics guidelines posted at businessof.tech. If you're interested in more content like this, you can get access to content early via our Patreon at patreon.com/MSPradio. It's our give what you want model where you set the value of what you think the content is worth. If you like this podcast, you can catch it daily as the 5-minute news and commentary show, The Business of Tech, available on all your favorite podcatchers with links at businessof.tech. Just hit that big blue button to subscribe. Again, thank you for taking time out of your day to listen, and I really value the interaction. If you want to say something in the comments, I do respond and watch all that, and I look forward to talking to you next time.